Rain pelts the cobblestone streets of Cowes, a medieval harbor town on the Isle of Wight, as darkness settles over the island on November 2, 1996. 16-year-old Damien Nettles steps out into the evening, his 6'4" frame casting a long shadow under the flickering streetlights. In mere hours, this ordinary Saturday night would transform into one of the island's most enduring mysteries, one that would haunt this close-knit community for decades to come. Like many teenagers before him, Damien had simple plans: a night out with his best friend in their sleepy island town. He couldn't have known that by sunrise he would become the center of a puzzle that would baffle investigators, torment his family, and leave an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about their peaceful corner of England. But to understand the events of that fateful night, we must first understand Damien himself. A young man whose life story spanned continents before fate brought him to this isolated stretch of the English Channel. Born under the tropical skies of Singapore on June 21, 1980, Damien was the youngest of 4 siblings, born to an American father, Ed, and an English mother, Valerie. His early years read like pages from a traveler's diary, marked by international moves that would shape his adaptable nature and open world view. But it wasn't until 1990, when the Nettles family anchored themselves to the Isle of Wight, that Damien truly found his place in the world. The Isle of Wight of the 90s became more than just a home to young Damien. It became his canvas. Here was a teenager who embodied the spirit of his era: Doc Martens on his feet, Nirvana and Blur filling his headphones, the Beatles posters adorning his bedroom walls. Despite his imposing height, which earned him the affectionate nickname, the Gentle Giant, Damien moved through life with a disarming warmth that drew people to him. Friends remember a boy who seemed to contain multitudes, a music enthusiast who could quote Kurt Cobain one moment and discuss marine biology the next, his dream field of study. His curiosity about the ocean seemed natural for someone living on an island, but it spoke to something deeper in Damien, a desire to understand the mysteries that lay beneath the surface. But on that rain-soaked November night in 1996, Damien would become entangled in a mystery far darker than any he had dreamed of exploring. 25 years later, the questions still echo through the island's narrow streets. What happened to the Gentle Giant of the Isle of Wight? Was his disappearance merely a tragic accident, a moment of teenage misadventure gone wrong? Or did something more sinister unfold in the shadows of this seemingly peaceful island community? The answers, like Damien himself, remain elusive. But to uncover the truth, we must return to that rainy night in November 1996, when a 16-year-old boy walked into the mist and never walked out. November 2nd, 1996, began like countless other Saturday nights on the Isle of Wight. Damien Nettles pulled on his favorite black sweater, slipped into his well-worn Doc Martens, and tugged at his blue jeans, a typical teenager preparing for what should have been a typical night out. As Ed Nettles watched his son climb out of the car in East Cowes, he called out a familiar parental warning: "Be home by midnight." Damien's response was characteristically carefree, a grin and a thank you tossed over his shoulder as he walked toward his best friend, Chris Boone's house. Neither father nor son could have known this mundane moment would be their last interaction. What followed was a night that would be scrutinized for decades to come, with each minute taking on profound significance in the search for answers. The evening started innocently enough. 2 teenage boys seeking adventure in their small island town. At 7 p.m., Damien met Chris, and by 7:10 p.m., they were headed to a party in East Cowes, their minds filled with typical teenage dreams of rebellion and freedom. The party proved disappointing, and by 9:15 p.m., the boys' night took its first pivot. Using his imposing height to his advantage, Damien managed to purchase cider from All-Day's convenience store at 9:30 p.m., no ID required. A small act of teenage defiance that would later haunt the memories of those who served him. The ferry crossing to West Cowes at 9:45 p.m. marked the beginning of what would become an increasingly fractured timeline. Fellow passengers would later recall the two friends chatting normally, showing no signs of heavy intoxication. But the night was young, and their plans were already unraveling as pub after pub denied them entry. The pivotal moment came at 10:30 p.m. near Granville Road. Chris, perhaps sensing the night had run its course, decided to head home. Damien, however, wasn't ready for the evening to end. This split-second decision, two friends parting ways on a rain-slicked street, would become the first thread in unraveling a mystery that would perplex investigators for years to come. What followed was a bizarre odyssey through the streets of West Cowes, captured in a series of increasingly concerning sightings. Each witness account added another piece to a puzzle that refused to form a clear picture. 10:45 p.m., a solitary figure walking down High Street, eating chips in the drizzling rain. 10:50 p.m., outside the Fountain Pub, being turned away and told to finish his food. 11:10 p.m., at the Harbor Lights, bumming a cigarette from a stranger. 11:15 p.m., in the pub's parking lot inexplicably trying to open a blue Ford Fiesta. 11:30 p.m., back at Yorkie's chip shop, his behavior now noticeably altered. 11:40 p.m., outside Lloyd's Bank, moving with apparent uncertainty. 11:50 p.m., again at the Harbor Lights, engaged in conversation with someone in another Ford Fiesta. The final documented moments of Damien's night took on an increasingly surreal quality. At 11:52 p.m., he passed Yorkie's one last time, offering a wave to the staff as he walked south. Minutes later, and what would become one of the case's most puzzling details, he boarded a bus and asked to be taken to Cowes, despite already being there. When the confused driver pointed this out, Damien attempted to take a photograph, an action that seemed to make no sense in the context of the moment. These final documented movements paint a portrait of a young man whose behavior had become increasingly erratic, perhaps influenced by alcohol, or possibly by something or someone that investigators have yet to fully understand. As midnight approached on that wet November night, Damien Nettles was walking the streets of West Cowes alone, each step taking him closer to a mystery that would consume his family, the island community, and true crime investigators for decades to come. The gentle giant of the Isle of Wight was about to vanish into the mist, leaving behind only a trail of confused sightings and unanswered questions. But the most perplexing chapter of this story was yet to begin. As the clock ticked toward midnight on November 2, 1996, Damien Nettles' behavior became increasingly enigmatic. His failed attempt to photograph the bus driver marked the beginning of what would be his final documented hour on the Isle of Wight. At 11:59 p.m., beneath the fluorescent lights of the co-op store, he made one last request for a cigarette from a passing stranger. But it was his next interaction that would haunt investigators for years to come. A witness, sitting safely in their car, described a scene that seemed pulled from a psychological thriller. A tall, visibly intoxicated young man approaching through the mist, asking for the window to be rolled down, only to whisper 5 chilling words. "They're watching us," before disappearing into the darkness of High Street. At 12:06 a.m. on November 3rd, a CCTV camera captured its grainy final glimpse of Damien Nettles. The footage, showing him walking along an empty Cowes High Street, would become the last known trace of the 16-year-old. After that moment, Damien Nettles vanished as completely as if he had never existed. Dawn broke over the Isle of Wight with no sign of Damien. In the Nettles household, morning routines gave way to growing panic as Ed and Valerie realized their son hadn't returned, something entirely out of character for the gentle giant who, despite his adventurous spirit, had never before failed to come home. Their calls went unanswered, each ring amplifying their fears until they were forced to face the unthinkable, reporting their 16-year-old son as missing. What followed was an investigation that would become almost as mysterious as the disappearance itself. Operation Ridgewood, launched in the wake of Damien's vanishing, was marked by a series of catastrophic failures that would haunt both the case and Damien's family for decades to come. The first devastating blow came with the loss of crucial CCTV footage showing Damien's final movements, footage that might have held the key to understanding his fate. This wasn't a simple oversight. It was a critical error so serious that in 2005, Valerie Nettles would file a formal complaint with the Independent Police Complaints Commission. While the responsible officer was reportedly dealt with, the damage was irreversible. The investigation continued to hemorrhage vital evidence. Police notebooks vanished. Duty rosters disappeared. Call logs that might have illuminated Damien's final hours simply ceased to exist. Perhaps most inexplicably, the case wasn't added to Holmes, the national computer system for major crime investigations, until 2002, 6 years after Damien disappeared into the night. As years passed, theories multiplied like shadows at dusk, each offering its own dark possibility about Damien's fate. The first and most obvious theory may be that Damien had accidentally fallen into the Solent was quickly dismissed by an unlikely source. Captain Henry Wrigley, then harbor master, spoke with the certainty of a man who had spent his life understanding the waterway's mercurial nature. "I am certain that had he gone into the water that night, he would have been returned to the land." Extensive marine searches supported his assertion, finding no trace of Damien in the waters around Cowes. A darker possibility emerged in 2002 when an informant stepped forward with a story about local drug dealer Nicky McNamara. According to this account, Damien's disappearance wasn't an accident, but a drug deal gone tragically wrong, an argument over cannabis that ended in unintended violence. The informant painted a grim picture. Damien's body, they claimed, had been hidden in a drug den for weeks before being buried in a sailbag near a cycle path. This sparked a new phase of investigation in 2010, with police conducting extensive searches of marshlands and wooded areas, focusing on individuals connected to the local drug scene and McNamara. But like every other thread in this tapestry of tragedy, it led nowhere, producing no physical evidence to support the informant's claims. These theories, whether involving accident or foul play, serve only to deepen the mystery surrounding Damien's disappearance. They raise more questions than they answer, adding layers of complexity to a case that has already defied explanation for nearly 3 decades. The story of Damien's disappearance inevitably leads to the darkened doorways of Cowes' drug scene, where 2 names emerge from the shadows: Nicky McNamara and his best friend, Bunny Isles. In the mid-1990s, they were part of a 12-person network that controlled the local drug trade, operating from pubs along the high street and various party houses, including one above a local butcher's shop. Witnesses would later recall Damien shouting up to this very flat on the night he vanished. When questioned by Valerie Nettles, Bunny Isles didn't deny his role in the local drug scene, but vehemently rejected any connection to Damien's disappearance. "Yes, the police arrested me. Yes, they searched my house," he admitted. "But I had nothing to do with what happened to your son." He extended this defense to his friend McNamara, insisting the dealer played no part in Damien's fate. But McNamara himself would never face direct questioning. In 2002, he was found dead from a heroin overdose in what locals ominously nicknamed the House of Death. the residence of his partner, Shirley Barrett. It was only after McNamara's death that whispers began linking him to Damien's disappearance. Stories circulated about a deathbed confession, though Barrett steadfastly denies her partner ever made such an admission. The investigation took a new turn in 2007 when private investigator Ivor Edwards began working with the Nettles family. Edwards uncovered witnesses who placed McNamara in a disturbing confrontation near Bars Hill around the time Damien disappeared, allegedly pinning a young man against a wall. But like so many leads in this case, this sighting remained frustratingly unverifiable. The investigation's scope expanded beyond the drug connection, venturing into even darker territory. Rumors emerged suggesting Damien had stumbled upon, or tried to prevent, a sexual assault, possibly in defense of a friend. These whispers gained enough traction to warrant investigation, but when pressed, key witnesses either denied making such claims or retracted their statements entirely. Similar stories about confrontations on the Cowes slipway dissolved under scrutiny. In '99, attention briefly turned to a known pedophile, but investigators quickly discovered the individual had left the Isle of Wight months before Damien's disappearance. Years later, another convicted pedophile would claim involvement, only to be exposed as fabricating the entire story. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Damien's case lies not in what we know, but in what was lost. The disappearance of crucial CCTV footage that might have illuminated Damien's final moments, represents an irretrievable opportunity to understand his fate. Those closest to Damien noticed subtle changes in the months before he vanished. Abby Scott, his girlfriend of 18 months until July '96, remembers him as a big, gentle giant, but admits to seeing flickers of someone else near the end of their relationship. Her observations paint a picture of a young man potentially drawn into a darker world. He was hanging around with a different group of people who were a little bit older than him. There were obviously some things he was keeping to himself. It could have been drugs. I don't know. Gemma Nunn, who was dating Damien when he disappeared, shares this frustration with the investigation's narrow focus. At no stage did they ask me questions about Damien taking drugs, or Damien getting into trouble, or talking about something bad happening to Damien, she recalls, suggesting crucial aspects of his life remained unexplored. These testimonies from the women who knew him best hint at a more complex truth, that in the months before his disappearance, the gentle giant of the Isle of Wight might have been walking a tightrope between two worlds, the ordinary life of a teenager and something far more dangerous lurking in the shadows of Cowes High Street. Would you like me to continue with the next segment? I'll maintain this style while building toward what appears to be the conclusion of this tragic mystery. When all the fragments of evidence are assembled, the erratic behavior captured on lost CCTV footage, the strange encounters with strangers, the whispered warning about being watched, a troubling picture begins to emerge. The gentle giant of the Isle of Wight appears to have strayed into dangerous territory that fatal November night, his judgment likely clouded by substances that made him vulnerable to whatever, or whoever, was waiting in the darkness. Those who knew Damien struggled to reconcile the careful, good-natured boy they loved with someone who would knowingly court danger. The more likely truth is that he stumbled into a situation beyond his control or understanding. A 16-year-old boy caught in circumstances that spiraled beyond his ability to navigate them safely. His final hours paint a portrait of confusion rather than calculation, of a young man who might not have recognized the danger until it was too late. The Hampshire Police's apology for the lost CCTV footage rings hollow against the magnitude of what that evidence might have revealed. Yet, the scale of their investigation speaks to their determination to find answers. Over 1,000 individuals interviewed, 357 witness statements collected, each one a thread in a tapestry that still fails to reveal the full picture. In 2013, a significant decision was made to transfer Damien's case to the Major Crime Team, where detectives regularly review the files, ready to pursue any new lead that might emerge from the shadows. It's a reminder that in the world of cold cases, no file is ever truly closed as long as questions remain unanswered. Perhaps no voice speaks more powerfully to the human cost of this enduring mystery than that of Valerie Nettles. Her words cut through the theories and speculation to reveal the raw heart of this tragedy. Finding his body, or what's left of it, it would be a gift, and it might not end, the distress, but if I could place him somewhere, instead of thinking of every awful thing that might have happened to him and wondering if he cried for us. In these words we hear the endless loop of questions that haunt not just a grieving mother, but an entire community. Did he suffer? Was he afraid? Did he call out for help that never came? The not knowing, Valerie suggests, is its own form of torture, an endless cycle of imagining the worst while hoping against hope for answers that might bring, if not peace, at least the small mercy of certainty. The empty space where Damien should be has become a void that his family cannot fill with memories alone. They need a place, somewhere to lay flowers, to speak his name, to transform their endless questions into quiet remembrance. It's a reminder that behind every unsolved mystery, there are those left behind who carry the weight of uncertainty with every passing day. Today, the case of Damien Nettles stands as both a warning and a plea. A warning about how quickly an ordinary teenage night can turn tragic, about how vulnerable we all are to the darker currents that run beneath the surface of even the most peaceful communities. And a plea, not just for information about what happened on that rainy November night in 1996, but for the simple dignity of knowing where a loved one's journey ended. As the Isle of Wight continues to hold its secrets, Damien's story reminds us that some mysteries do more than perplex. They wound, they haunt, they echo through generations. And somewhere, perhaps, someone still holds the key to bringing the gentle giant home.